The dust collection is working great. I installed all the ducting, and there's some really cool features included with it. Here's a quick overview of the design and layout. The blower, cyclone, and barrel are located in the front corner of the space. One long straight line will run the entire length of this sidewall. Most of my dust creating happens closer to this wall. From this straight line, I'll branch out several times to different areas. The first 2 drops go to swing out arms to cover the workbench, CNC, table saw, and all the floor space. Another split off goes to a dead end for future expansion potential, and the next 3 go to specific tools at this new miter saw station. My collector and separator are set up for 6-inch tubing. I chose to use metal ducting because of availability and cost. You'll see that it is easy to customize without the need for extra couplings like you would with PVC. Now, I did custom order the Ys for this system. Whenever you have 2 pieces converging, you want the dusty airflow to be directed along its path. If the path is obstructed, you limit the efficiency of the system. The Ys that are found at the big box stores are for blowing air out into a house. We are bringing air to a single point, so we want the male and female connections to work in our favor. The off-the-shelf Ys are backwards from what we want, and quite frankly, they kind of look more like Ts than Ys, which will also reduce our efficiency. All right, let's get to work. All that ducting needs to be held up on the wall somehow. I figured this was a great excuse to design something and use the CNC to cut out a bunch of them. These brackets are split in 2, a top half and a bottom half. After painting, the bottom half gets attached directly to a piece of 1/2-inch plywood. They'll go up on the wall like this, and then the top half will be added afterwards to hold the ducting in place. I removed the temporary flex hoses to get going on the permanent ducting. In order for the dust cyclone to be as effective as possible, it's best to have the longest, straightest line leading into it. This helps the material gain a lot of speed before being separated from the air. I needed to add an elbow going into the cyclone to redirect the line just slightly to get around the filter. This is where I'm adding what I think is the coolest feature of the dust collection system, a 3-foot long, clear acrylic tube. With this, I can see material zip through at lightning speed. Fine dust won't be visible, but anything of size can be seen. I figured out the direction this tube will go, attached a wall bracket just above the 8-foot mark, and measured how much straight tube I'd need to get the rest of the way. Straight tube cuts relatively easily with sheet metal shears. I figured out a better method to cutting straight lines that I'll show in a few minutes. Even though these are both supposed to be 6 inches, the metal is larger than the acrylic. It took a bit of finagling to get the metal into the acrylic. I sealed up the seam and the extra slight cut with sealing duct tape. The acrylic fits perfectly into the elbow. I sealed that and reworked the new corner to aim straight down the wall. The great thing about the tape I'm using is that it holds really well and gives added support to hold up the pieces across the gap when there isn't a bracket support. It doesn't eliminate the need for wall brackets, it just prevents a few spots like this from sagging over time. I noticed that the screws holding the bracket to the plate were coming loose. I didn't glue the joint, which was a mistake, so I went back, glued all the joints, and replaced the loose bracket with a sturdy one. I couldn't help but see what it looked like with some light material getting flung through the tube. Even with a little room for acceleration, it was fast. Right after this elbow, we enter the long straightaway that will run the length of the wall. A bunch of Ys will be along the way, splitting into all the different elements. The first Y will connect directly into that elbow. This will split off to the first swinging arm that will cover the entire workbench. The downspout will be in the gap between the French cleat sections. I used my tape measure to make sure I liked the distance that the arm would reach out into the workshop, and marked with some tape the rough spot where the arm would begin. The construction of the arms is a feat in themselves. I'll cover that in the next video. From the Y, I added a couple of brackets to support a long section of straight pipe. The second Y will lead to a second arm that swings out over the CNC. I followed the same measuring process, but used it to figure out how much more straight pipe I'd need until the Y. The third Y goes upwards. With this system, I don't want to limit myself. This workshop may grow or transform in the future, so while this Y leads it to a dead end, it has future expansion potential. An awesome tool that I discovered while doing research for this project is a duct crimper. This tool allows you to add the crimped edge to any tube, making it easy to properly fit pieces together. Or in this case, where this section of pipe has crimps on both ends, so I could add the cap. The fourth Y splits down to the workbench to connect the scroll saw and sander. Right after the Y, I added an elbow that brings the direction of the pipe straight down. I did my best to make as straight of a drop from the elbow to the ducting coming out of the workbench below. It's time to install the first blast gate. For this, I needed to remove a small section of French cleat. I drilled pilot holes that were too small and preloaded screws. I should have made the holes bigger and used button top screws. When I drove those screws in, they split the plywood a bit. Not enough to be an issue, but just enough to be visually annoying. It took a little bit of finagling, but I got the tubing in to connect the workbench to the system. With this part of the system set up, I couldn't help but cap all the existing openings to test out how well it worked. I gotta say, seeing my vision actually work out is just so cool. It worked like a charm. The fifth Y is for the miter saw. I decided the downspout for it should be just past the miter saw and through the small workbench section on the right. The final downspout is just before the wall. This will cover anything that I'd like to do on this small workbench. My spray paint holder was in the way. Not sure if I'll continue to use this or figure out some better storage solution, but for now, it has to move out of the way. I used 2 elbows to make as gradual of a 90-degree turn as I could. Next, I added the blast gates to the 2 downspouts. I offset them slightly, so from afar, I can more easily see if the gates are opened or closed. Here, you can see how the ducting goes into 1 3/4 inch sheet of the plywood frame and stays clear of the moving gate. For the miter saw dust collection, I used an additional blast gate to mark on the workbench the hole that needed to be cut. I had to keep in mind the 2x4 frame below the worktop. A series of 4 elbows make the 180-degree turn needed to direct to the spot behind the miter saw. I cut a long tube to the right size, then struggled to put it in place because of the awkward angles I was working with. A 12-inch by 6-inch funnel will live behind the miter saw leading into this tube. This large opening will collect the dust in the air created by the saw. I cut an opening in an extra sheet of 1/2-inch plywood to mount this funnel. The end of the funnel needed to be crimped. I definitely didn't show all of it, but this tool got a lot of use during this project. It was a good investment. The funnel board fit perfectly behind the miter saw. Can't wait to not have dusty cuts with this tool anymore. I needed just a small straight section of tube to reach down far enough. By now, I had cut enough straight sections and had figured out a way to make accurate cuts. I used measuring tape and make a mark all around the pipe at that same distance. Then it's a lot easier to cut a clean edge as opposed to a wonky one like some of the earlier cuts. The tubing all fit together nicely, and while I know having so many curves for this part of the system isn't quite ideal, it still had no issues drawing air. The miter saw needs to be contained somehow, or else the dust collection would never be as efficient as I'd like. I figured out that an extra large Home Depot box is just the right size to fit around my saw. I started by cutting the dust collection opening on the bottom, then cut out the opening to fit around the saw. This box is a cheap and easy way to contain the dust and direct the airflow. It doesn't fit when cutting 45-degree angles, but the majority of my cuts here are boring straight cuts anyway. Down the road, if it becomes an issue, I'll revisit. I did a few test cuts and it worked great, keeping the dust contained, so I painted the box blue for aesthetic purposes. While the paint was drying, I started working on a small spray painting booth. I tested a filter in front of a box fan, and the filter caught all the paint. The box fan fits almost perfectly in an extra large box, so with some clever cuts, I now have a small spray paint booth. The fan draws air evenly through the filter, and the air then continues through the tubes to the collector. The cover for the miter saw was dry, so it was great to use that as I made a bracket to hold the end of the pipe on the wall. This bracket will sit just above the spray paint booth box to hold a ducting extension. The box is easily removable to regain the workspace. If you noticed, the blast gates have open holes on either side. These are for green and red ropes that make it easy to move the gate as well as tell from afar the status of each gate. With a quick glance, I can tell what gates are open and which are closed. The dust collection system is coming along great. The new workbench is fully hooked up. The clear tube looks awesome. There's room for growth with the additional split. Next, I'll focus on the two big swinging arms that will cover the CNC and the main workbench. Okay, that's it for now. See ya.